I'm standing in a hospital corridor that smells like disinfectant and regret. My hands are shaking because the nurse just said a name that wasn't the one I came for. I push open the wrong door anyway. Inside, a woman is dying. No flowers, no cards, no visitors. Just a heart monitor counting down something precious. She looks at me like she's been waiting her whole life for someone to walk in. And in that moment, before I know her name, before I know her past, before I know the lie that brought me here, I make a promise that will change everything. 8 months later, I marry her. But that night is where the truth begins. Welcome to my YouTube channel. This is my story of betrayal, and if you've ever trusted the wrong person, hit that subscribe button because you are not alone. Here is how it happened. I didn't plan to be a hero. I didn't plan to fall in love, and I definitely didn't plan to walk into the wrong hospital room and come out with a life I never imagined. I was there because of a lie, one I believed so completely that I never questioned it. The kind of lie that slides into your life quietly like a nurse checking vitals, until one day it's too late to pretend you didn't hear the beeping. I was supposed to visit Mark. Mark was my best friend, or at least that's what I thought. We'd known each other since university, shared apartments, shared debts, shared dreams about the lives we'd build once we made it. When he called me that morning, his voice sounded small, fragile. He said he'd been admitted overnight after collapsing at work. Room 614, he told me. Don't freak out. I don't want to be alone. So I went. No coffee, no breakfast. Just guilt pushing me forward because I'd canceled on him twice already that month. I remember the elevator ride, how every floor felt heavier than the last, how I rehearsed jokes to lighten the mood, how I told myself I'd stay 10 minutes, maybe 15. Room 614 was at the end of the hall. Or so I thought. I knocked once, no answer. Knocked again, still nothing. The door was cracked open, and I pushed it gently, expecting to see Mark asleep, wires everywhere, probably complaining later that I woke him. Instead, I saw her. She was thinner than she should have been, pale but not sickly, more like someone whose light was dimming. Her hair was pulled back in a careless knot, like she hadn't bothered to look in a mirror for days. There was no TV on, no balloons, no bedside table cluttered with gifts, just a small bag on the chair and a folded sweater at the foot of the bed. And her eyes. Her eyes locked onto mine the second I stepped in. "I'm sorry," I said immediately. "Wrong room." But she smiled, not polite, not awkward, grateful. "That's okay," she whispered. Her voice was soft, worn. "People don't usually knock." I hesitated. The polite thing would have been to leave. The normal thing would have been to apologize again and close the door. But something in me froze, like the universe had pressed pause. "I thought you were someone else," I said stupidly. "So did I," she replied. I laughed. She didn't. And then I noticed the chart at the foot of her bed, the words I wasn't supposed to read, the timeline I wasn't supposed to understand. Terminal. The silence stretched. The heart monitor kept time. I felt like an intruder in the most private moment of a stranger's life. "I'll go," I said. "I didn't mean to." "You can stay," she said quickly, too quickly. "If you want. It's nice to have someone here." That's when it hit me. No flowers, no visitors, no interruptions. Just a woman waiting in a room like a forgotten promise. I pulled the chair closer. "My name's," I started. "I know," she interrupted gently, nodding toward my visitor badge. "You're early." For something," she said, drifting to the window. "Everyone is." We talked. Not about death, Not about illness, about normal things. Movies she loved, a beach she visited once as a kid and never forgot, how hospital coffee tasted like punishment. She asked about me, my job, my city, why I looked like I was carrying a secret. I was reading comments on my YouTube videos the other day, and I realized I wasn't the only one, I told her, surprising myself. I talked about strangers opening up online, about how pain travels faster than joy, about how people say things to a screen they'd never say out loud. She listened like every word mattered. Her name was Evelyn. When I finally stood to leave, she looked scared, not dramatic, just honest. "Will you come back?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. "I mean," she nodded, already bracing herself. "People say that." I went to the nurse's station to ask where Mark was. The nurse frowned, typed, checked again. "Mark?" she asked. "He was discharged this morning." My phone buzzed. A message from Mark. "Sorry, man. False alarm. Meant to tell you." I stood there staring at the screen, realizing something was off. Room numbers, timing, the lie that brought me here suddenly felt deliberate. I turned back towards the hallway, towards the room with no flowers, because I had a feeling deep in my chest that I wasn't supposed to walk away. And as I reached for the door again, I had no idea this mistake would expose a betrayal far deeper than a wrong room and bind me to a woman whose time was running out. I didn't go back to Evelyn's room that day. That's the part people judge me for when I tell this story. They imagine some movie moment where I rush back, grab her hand, promise I'll never leave. But real life doesn't work like that. Real life hesitates. Real life gets scared of meaning. I went home instead, and all the way there, Mark's message kept replaying in my head. False alarm, meant to tell you. It didn't sit right. Mark was careless, sure, but not like this. Not when he'd sounded so afraid on the phone. Not when he'd given me a room number with such certainty. I tried calling him, straight to voicemail. I texted again, no reply. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept seeing Evelyn's eyes when she asked, "Will you come back?" Not hopeful, prepared. Prepared for disappointment. The next morning, I told myself I was just checking something, that I needed closure, that I was being polite. I even bought a coffee on the way to the hospital. 1 cup, black, no sugar. I didn't bring flowers because that felt like a promise I wasn't ready to make. Her door was open. She was awake. And when she saw me, she smiled like she'd won an argument with the universe. "You came," she said. "I said I might," I replied, sitting down too quickly, like if I didn't, I'd lose my nerve. She shrugged. "Most people don't." I handed her the coffee. "This is terrible," I warned. She took a sip anyway, grimaced, laughed. A real laugh, short, breathy, alive. "Yeah, that's awful. Thank you." We talked longer this time, about nothing important and everything that was. She told me she used to paint, watercolors mostly, but her hands shook too much now. She told me her parents had died years ago, and her brother, she paused there. "He stopped answering my calls when things got complicated," she said carefully. I didn't push. Instead, I told him about Mark, about how we'd met, about the call, about how I couldn't figure out why he'd lied. She listened. Then she said something that landed heavier than anything else. "Some people only tell the truth when they're scared. Others lie for the same reason." When I left that afternoon, I promised I'd come back the next day, and the next, and the next. Somewhere between day 3 and day 7, the hospital staff started assuming I belonged there. Nurses nodded at me like I was family. One of them handed me an extra blanket once and said, "She sleeps better when you're here." That sentence terrified me because I wasn't supposed to matter. But I did. Evelyn never asked me to stay longer, never guilted me, never cried when I left. She just existed, quietly, bravely, like someone who'd made peace with the clock but still enjoyed the seconds. One afternoon, I brought her a small sketchbook, cheap paper, nothing fancy. "For when your hands behave," I said. She touched the cover like it was fragile. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to." She didn't draw that day or the next, but she kept it on her lap like a secret. Meanwhile, Mark finally resurfaced. He showed up at my apartment unannounced 2 weeks after the hospital visit that wasn't a big giggle. He looked fine, too fine. "Why did you lie to me?" I asked him the second he stepped inside. He laughed. "I didn't lie. I just exaggerated. You told me you collapsed. I was stressed. You gave me a room number." His smile faltered, just for a moment. "Look, I needed you to go there." "To the hospital? To that floor?" My stomach dropped. "Why?" He hesitated, then sighed like I was the unreasonable one. "Because Evelyn wouldn't see me." The name hit me like a shove. "You know her," I said slowly. "Yeah," he admitted. "We dated. Briefly." That word briefly felt like an insult. "She stopped answering me," he continued. "Then I found out she was sick. I just wanted to talk, to explain." "So you sent me instead?" I snapped. "I thought she'd see a familiar face, someone safe." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was horrifying. "You manipulated me," I said. "You used her." "No," he said quickly. "I helped her. She wasn't alone anymore, was she?" That's when I realized something about Mark that I'd never seen before. He didn't see people. He saw outcomes. I told him to leave. That night, I sat in Evelyn's room longer than usual. She noticed immediately. "You're quiet," she said. I debated lying. I almost did. Then I remembered her honesty, her calm, the way she never pretended. "I met someone who knows you," I said. Her body stiffened. "Mark," I added. She closed her eyes. "That explains a lot," she whispered. I waited. He never loved me. He loved the idea of fixing me. When he realized he couldn't, he disappeared. I told him everything. The lie, the room number, the reason I'd walked into her life by mistake. She didn't get angry. She laughed softly, shaking her head. So even fate had to cheat a little. That was the moment something shifted between us, something dangerous, something irreversible, because we both understood it now. We hadn't met by accident. We'd been arranged by a lie, by desperation, by someone who never thought about the consequences. And yet, there we were, together. Later that evening, as I stood to leave, Evelyn reached for my hand. Her grip was weaker than before. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Anything." "Are you here because you feel sorry for me or because you want to be?" I opened my mouth and realized I didn't know the answer, because somewhere between the wrong room and the right conversation, I had crossed a line I couldn't see anymore. And if I stayed for the wrong reason, I'd break her heart. But if I left, I might break my own. I didn't answer Evelyn's question that night, not out loud. I squeezed her hand gently, smiled like a coward, and said, "I'll see you tomorrow." Then I walked out of the hospital and let the automatic doors close behind me like a verdict. Are you here because you feel sorry for me or because you want to be? The question followed me everywhere. It sat in my passenger seat on the drive home. It stared at me from the mirror while I brushed my teeth. It kept me awake, not because it was difficult, but because it was honest. I told myself I was being kind, that I was doing a good thing, that sitting with a dying woman who had no visitors was the kind of story people applauded. But kindness that needs applause is never clean. The truth was messier. I wanted to be there, and wanting something that fragile felt selfish. The next morning, I went to work and accomplished nothing. At lunch, I found myself standing in a bookstore I didn't remember walking into, staring at a display of cheap romance novels and grief memoirs. I left with a poetry book instead. No title in mind, just something that felt gentle. I brought it to the hospital that afternoon. Evelyn was asleep when I arrived, her chest rising unevenly, the machines doing their quiet work. I sat down and waited. I'd learned patience from her, how time bends differently when you know it's limited. When she woke, she looked startled, then relieved. "You're still here," she said. "So are you," I replied. She smiled, then noticed the book. "For me?" I said, "For us," then immediately regretted it. She raised an eyebrow. "Us?" I opened the book to a random page and read aloud. My voice shook at first, then steadied. The poem was about borrowed time, about how love doesn't ask permission, it just arrives and demands to be felt. When I finished, the room was quiet. "That's dangerous," she said softly. "I know. Why would you bring something like that to a dying woman?" I met her eyes. "Because pretending this isn't happening would be worse." She studied me for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Okay," she said, "then don't pretend." So I didn't. I told her I wasn't there out of pity. I told her I didn't know what I was there for exactly, but it wasn't guilt. It was curiosity. It was connection. It was the strange comfort of being fully seen by someone who had nothing left to hide. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. "That's the most honest thing anyone said to me in months." From that day on, we stopped circling the truth. We talked about fear, about the loneliness that comes from people treating you like glass, about how illness doesn't just attack the body, it erases you socially too. Friends vanish, acquaintances send one message and then disappear. Life keeps moving, and you're expected to fade quietly. "You don't fade," I told her once. She laughed. "I do, just slowly." I started bringing her small pieces of the outside world, photos from my walks, a leaf in autumn colors, a ridiculous gossip story from work. She told me hospital secrets, who flirted with which nurse, which doctor cried in supply closets, which patients pretended to be asleep to avoid visitors. One afternoon, she finally used the sketchbook. Her hands trembled, but she drew anyway. Simple lines. A window, a figure sitting beside a bed. "That's you," she said, embarrassed. I didn't know what to say, so I stayed quiet. Weeks passed. Her condition worsened, then stabilized, then worsened again. The doctor started using words like unexpected and resilient. They stopped giving timelines. I started measuring time differently too, not in weeks, but in moments, in laughs, in silences that didn't feel awkward. Mark texted once, "How is she?" I never replied. By month 3, I was spending more time at the hospital than home. I learned which vending machine stole money and which one didn't. I learned how to read Evelyn's face, how the slightest tension meant pain, how her jokes got sharper when she was scared. One night, during a storm, the power flickered. Emergency lights came on, bathing the room in red. Rain hammered the windows. "I hate the dark," she said quietly. I reached for her hand without thinking. "Tell me something true," she said. "You're brave," I replied. She shook her head. "That's easy. Tell me something hard." I swallowed. "I don't know how to leave you," I said. She squeezed my fingers. "Then don't. Just don't promise more than you can survive." That word survive sat between us. Later that night, after she fell asleep, a nurse pulled me aside. "You should prepare yourself," she said gently. "We're not sure how much time she has." I nodded, like I understood, but I didn't, because somewhere along the way, Evelyn stopped being a visit. She became my life, and the thought of losing her felt like suffocating slowly. The next morning, Evelyn asked me to do something unexpected. "She will take me outside," I said. "Outside?" "She wants to feel the sun," she said, "just once." The doctors protested, the nurses hesitated. I signed forms I barely read. They wheeled her out into the courtyard, wrapped in blankets, her face turned towards the light like a flower remembering what it used to be. She closed her eyes, and for a moment she looked peaceful. She said, "Promise me something." I said, "Anything," without thinking. She opened her eyes and looked straight at me. "Promise you won't disappear when this gets harder." I opened my mouth to answer and realized every promise had consequences. Because if I stayed, I'd lose her. But if I left, I'd lose myself. I said yes. That's the dangerous part. I didn't negotiate. I didn't ask for time. I didn't protect myself with conditions or logic. I looked at Evelyn, wrapped in blankets, sunlight trembling across her face, and I said, "I promise." The moment the word left my mouth, I felt it lock into place. People think promises are romantic. They don't talk enough about how heavy they are, how once spoken, they stop belonging to you. Evelyn didn't smile when I promised. She didn't thank me. She just closed her eyes again, like she was filing the moment away for later, something to hold on to when things turned dark. And they did. That night, her pain spiked. Alarms rang. Doctors rushed in. I was pushed back against the wall, useless, watching strangers take control of someone who had quietly become everything. I stood there, heart pounding, thinking, this is what you promised for. She stabilized around midnight. A doctor explained things in careful sentences that avoided certainty. When they finally let me back in, she was exhausted but awake. "You stayed," she murmured. I sat down, my knees weak. "I told you I would." She studied my face. "You look scared." "I am." She smiled faintly. "Good. That means you're still alive." Days blurred into each other after that. Her world shrank to the room. Mine shrank with it. Friends stopped calling, work emails piled up unanswered. My apartment felt like a hotel I occasionally slept in. I stopped planning beyond the next hospital visit. One afternoon, a woman came into the room while I was there. Well-dressed, expensive coat, perfume that didn't belong in a place like that. Evelyn stiffened. "This is my sister," she said quietly, "Lena." Lena looked at me like I was an inconvenience, then at Evelyn like she was a responsibility she hadn't planned for. "I didn't know you had company," Lena said. Evelyn's hand found mine, not dramatic, deliberate. "This is the person who didn't leave," she said. Lena's eyes narrowed just enough to be noticed. We didn't talk much. Lena stayed 10 minutes, asked the doctors questions, avoided eye contact with Evelyn, then turned to leave. At the door, she paused, looked at me. "Don't get attached," she said softly. "You don't know what you're stepping into." Then she left. Evelyn stared at the ceiling afterward. "She thinks you're temporary," she said. "Is she wrong?" I asked. She didn't answer. That night, Evelyn asked me to help her write letters. "For after," she said. "To who?" I asked. "To people who won't come," she replied. We wrote 3. One to her brother, short, restrained, forgiving. One to Lena, longer, sharper, unfinished. And one she wouldn't let me read. "For you," she said, sliding it into an envelope with my name on it, but not yet. I tried to joke. What if I open it early? She gave me a look. Then I'll haunt you. I laughed, but my throat burned. A week later, something shifted again. She stopped getting worse. Not better, just stable. The doctor stopped whispering. Tests came back confusing. They started using words like outlier and unusual response. One morning, the lead physician pulled me aside. "This isn't typical," he said. "We can't explain it." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "She might have more time than we thought," he added. Hope is a dangerous drug. I watched it flood Evelyn's face when I told her, watched her hesitate like she didn't trust it either. "For what?" she asked. "For us," I said. She laughed, but it caught in her chest. For the first time, the future wasn't theoretical, it was frighteningly real. She started talking about things she hadn't before, about wanting to see the ocean again, about living somewhere small and quiet, about waking up without machines. "You're planning," I said one evening. She shrugged. "I'm imagining." I didn't stop her, because imagining meant believing, and believing meant risk. 2 months later, Evelyn was discharged, not cured, not healed, just released. They called it home care, a small apartment near the hospital, nurses, schedules, pills. I helped her move in. The apartment was bare, white walls, too quiet. She sat on the couch, suddenly overwhelmed. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "Neither do I admitted, "but I'm here." She looked at me then, really looked at me. "You could still walk away," she said. "No one would blame you." I thought of Mark, of the lie that started everything, of the promise I'd made in sunlight. I'm not here because I have to be. I'm here because I choose to be. That night I slept on the floor, and sometime before morning, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't waiting for her to die anymore. I was imagining her living, which meant the promise I made to not disappear when it got harder was about to be tested in a way I never expected. Because surviving together is harder than staying for the ending. Living is louder than dying. That's something no one tells you. When Evelyn moved into the apartment, I thought the hardest part would be the fear, the constant waiting for bad news, the monitoring, the pills lined up like tiny ultimatums on the counter. I thought I already knew how to be afraid. I was wrong. The hardest part was how normal things started to feel. Mornings with sunlight instead of fluorescent bulbs, coffee that didn't taste like punishment, Evelyn sitting on the couch wrapped in a blanket complaining about the neighbor's music. We argued about what to watch. We laughed at stupid commercials. We burned toast. We lived. And living made everything more dangerous, because now there was something to lose. I kept telling myself this was still temporary, that I was helping her transition, that eventually she'd stabilize enough to not need me hovering like a shadow, that I'd go back to my old life. But my old life felt fake now. Friends would ask, "How's she doing?" like she was a project, a phase, something I'd eventually complete. They didn't understand that Evelyn wasn't an experience. She was a person. One night, as I was setting up her medication, she watched me carefully. "You're tired," she said. "I'm fine." "You're lying." I sighed. "I don't know how to do this without disappearing myself." She nodded slowly. "That's the part I was afraid of." We sat in silence, the kind that carries weight. "Why are you really here?" she asked gently. Not the kind answer, the real one. I thought about it longer than I should have. "Because you see me," I said finally, "and because with you, nothing feels wasted." Her eyes filled, not with sadness, but with something sharper. "Then we need to talk," she said. That's how I knew something was coming. She reached for a folder on the table, medical documents, prognoses, notes I hadn't been allowed to read. I didn't tell you everything when I was in the hospital. My chest tightened. They didn't just say terminal, she continued. They said unpredictable. There's a chance, small but real, that I could live years. Years. The word echoed like a dropped glass. I didn't want you to stay because you felt obligated, she said, and I didn't want to hope out loud in case it disappeared. I couldn't speak. So now I'm asking you again, not as someone dying, but as someone who might live. She took my hand. Do you still want to be here? This time there was no room for excuses. I thought of every way out, every rational argument, every warning Lena had given me, every future version of myself that might regret this. Then I looked at Evelyn. I don't know how to leave, and I don't want to learn. Her breath hitched. From that moment on, something changed. We stopped acting like time was borrowed. We argued more, laughed harder, planned cautiously. We talked about money, about logistics, about fear, about intimacy, slow, careful, honest. The first time we kissed wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, almost shy, and it meant everything. Months passed. Evelyn got stronger, not healthy, but present. She gained weight, color returned to her face. The doctors stopped using the word miracle, but didn't correct anyone who did. I moved in officially. That's when the outside world started pushing back. Lena called. I think you're making a mistake, she said flatly. I think you don't know her anymore, I replied. She was always like this, pulling people in when she's afraid. That sentence stayed with me. Then Mark showed up again, at the apartment, uninvited. He looked shocked to see Evelyn standing on her own, alive in a way he hadn't expected. This isn't what they told me, he said. You don't get to be here, Evelyn said calmly. I was worried, he insisted. No, she replied. You were curious. I stepped in between them. You lied to me, and you don't get to rewrite that. Mark looked at me like I'd betrayed him. Maybe I had. After he left, Evelyn sat down heavily. This is why I didn't want to hope, she whispered. People come back when they think you're not dying anymore. I knelt in front of her. I'm not here because you survived. I'm here because you lived. She touched my face like she was memorizing it. That night, she asked me to open the letter, the one she'd written months ago. My hand shook as I unfolded it. It wasn't a goodbye. It was a choice. She'd written about fear, about control, about how dying made everything simple and living made everything complicated. If you're reading this, she wrote, it means I didn't disappear, and neither did you. If you want to stay, stay because you choose me, not because you saved me. I looked up at her. She was watching me like the answer mattered. I choose you, I said. She smiled then, soft, certain. 8 months after I walked into the wrong hospital room, I asked her to marry me, not because time was running out, but because it wasn't. And that terrified me more than death ever did, because loving someone who might live means facing the future without an excuse. And just when I thought the hardest part was over, the truth about Evelyn's past finally caught up with us. Engagement didn't make things lighter. That surprised me. I thought once we named it, once I put a ring on her finger and said, this is real, the fear would shrink, that the past would loosen its grip, that the story would finally move forward. Instead, it doubled back. The first crack appeared 2 weeks after we told people. It was a letter. No return address, thick paper, typed, not handwritten. Evelyn found it in the mailbox and stood frozen in the doorway, like the envelope itself weighed something. Do you want me to open it? I asked. She shook her head too quickly. No, I need a minute. She went inside, sat at the table, and stared at it for a long time before finally tearing it open. I watched her face change as she read. Not fear, recognition. "They found me," she whispered. "Who?" I asked, already bracing myself. She folded the letter carefully, like it could be put back the way it was. "My old life," she said. I didn't like the way she said that. Over the next few days, pieces started coming out, not all at once, not cleanly. I learned that before the illness, before the hospital room, before me, Evelyn had been married once before. Briefly, violently. She hadn't told me because, in her words, it felt like telling a story about someone who didn't exist anymore. Her ex-husband had been controlling, charming in public, cruel in private. When she got sick, he vanished, left the country, left debts, left her name tied to things she didn't do. And now, somehow, he was back. "He says he wants closure," she said, voice flat. "He says he wants to make things right." I laughed without humor. People like that don't want closure, they want control. She nodded. "I know. But knowing doesn't make it easier." The next time Lena called, her tone was different, sharp, urgent. "You're in danger, both of you." That night, Evelyn finally told me everything. About the financial mess, about the legal documents she'd signed while sick, barely conscious, about how her name was still attached to something that could ruin us if it resurfaced publicly. "I didn't want to bring this into your life," she said. "I thought, if I died, it would die with me." The words landed like a slap. "You thought dying was simpler than telling me?" I asked quietly. She looked ashamed. "Yes." I didn't yell, I didn't walk out, but something cracked. Because loving someone who might live means inheriting their mess, not just their moments. A week later, he showed up. Not at the apartment, at my work. He knew my name, my schedule, things Evelyn hadn't told him. He smiled like we were already friends. "You must be the hero, the one who stayed." I wanted to hit him. Instead, I asked, "What do you want?" He said, "To talk. About Evelyn, about how fragile she is, about how you don't really know her." That sentence followed me home like a threat. That night, Evelyn broke down for the first time since I'd known her. Not quietly, not bravely. I tried to escape. I tried to disappear before he could come back. That's when I understood something terrifying. The hospital room wasn't just where we met, it was where she hid. And now the past had found her. The engagement didn't protect us. Love didn't erase damage. It only gave it something to aim at. And as I held her, promising again that I wasn't leaving, I wondered, quietly, selfishly, whether staying was about courage or whether I was walking into a war I didn't know how to fight. He didn't wait long. 3 days after showing up at my work, Evelyn's ex made his move, not with fists or threats, but with something far more dangerous: paper. I came home to find Evelyn sitting on the floor surrounded by documents, legal notices, financial statements, words like liability, fraud, pending review printed in bold, merciless ink. "They froze my accounts," she said, her voice hollow. "All of them." My heart dropped. "How?" She whispered. "He filed a claim, says I signed off on something years ago, says I knew." I knelt beside her, picking up the papers. My hands shook as I read. It didn't matter whether it was true. It mattered that it looked true. This was his power, not violence, credibility. "They'll investigate," she said. "If this goes public—" "Stop," I said firmly. "We'll get a lawyer." She looked at me with panic sharp enough to cut. "With what money?" That night, she barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, her body jerked awake, like it remembered something her mind wanted to forget. At dawn, I got a call from an unknown number. It was him. "I'm not the villain you think I am," he said calmly. "I just want what's fair." "You want control," I snapped. He laughed softly. "I want to protect myself. She was sick when she signed those papers. That puts everything in question, including your engagement." The word felt deliberate. "She's not sick anymore," I said. "Doesn't matter," he replied. "The record says she was, and records last longer than people." When I told Evelyn about the call, she went very still. "He's going to force me to choose," she said. "Choose what?" "Between fighting him or disappearing again." That's when the fear changed shape. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about identity. A court date was set. Temporary, they said, just a hearing. But we both knew what it meant. The night before, Evelyn handed me the ring. "I can't drag you into this. If this destroys my name, my finances—" "I already chose you," I interrupted. "This isn't romantic," she said, tears streaking down her face. "This is ruin." I took the ring and placed it back on her finger. "Then we face ruin together, or we face nothing at all." She looked at me like she was memorizing that moment in case it was the last one that mattered. The courtroom was cold, impersonal, too bright. Her ex sat across from us, composed, confident, already rehearsing victory. His lawyer spoke smoothly about documents and timelines, about responsibility and consent. Then Evelyn took the stand. Her hands trembled at first, her voice too. But then she stopped trying to sound strong. She told the truth instead. About the marriage, the manipulation, the illness, the hospital room, the way dying made everything simple and living forced her to confront what she'd been running from. She didn't paint herself as innocent. She painted herself as human. When the judge asked why she hadn't come forward sooner, she answered honestly, "Because I thought I wouldn't be here long enough for it to matter." The room went silent. Her ex shifted for the first time. The judge requested medical testimony, records, timelines, things he didn't expect us to have, because we hadn't been alone. The nurse who remembered me, the doctor who documented her mental clarity, the social worker who noted the isolation, they all spoke. And slowly, the story he controlled started to unravel. After hours that felt like years, the judge ruled. Temporary injunction denied. Accounts unfrozen. Further investigation ordered into him. Outside the courthouse, Evelyn collapsed into my arms. "I thought I'd lose everything," she whispered. "You almost did, including yourself." That night, she spiked a fever. Old symptoms returned. Pain, weakness. The stress had triggered something. An ambulance ride, flashing lights, the same hospital hallway where it all began. Different room, same smell. As doctors worked, a nurse pulled me aside. "We're concerned," she said gently. The word terminal hovered again, unspoken but present. I sat beside Evelyn's bed, holding her hand, watching the monitors like they were making a decision for us. She opened her eyes briefly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "If I disappear—" "Don't," I said, my voice breaking. "You promised you wouldn't disappear, remember?" She smiled faintly. "Then don't let go." I didn't. But as the machines beeped faster, as doctors whispered urgently, as fear filled the room, I realized something with brutal clarity. Walking into the wrong hospital room saved her life once. This time, love alone might not be enough. The machines didn't decide her fate that night. People like to believe there's a moment, one flat line, one heroic intervention, one clean ending. But real endings are quieter. They stretch. They hesitate. They give you just enough hope to keep you awake. Evelyn didn't die. Not that night. Her body fought back in the slow, stubborn way it always had. The doctors called it a stress-induced relapse. They adjusted medication, they monitored, they waited. So did I. I sat there for 3 days straight, sleeping in fragments, eating nothing that mattered. I watched the rise and fall of her chest like it was the most important rhythm in the world. On the 4th morning, she opened her eyes fully. "You look terrible," she whispered. I laughed, a sound halfway to a sob. "You should see the other guy." She smiled, real, present. "I stayed," she said. "Yes," I replied, "you did." Recovery wasn't fast or easy or inspirational in the way stories like to pretend. There were setbacks. There were days she hated her body, days I hated myself for feeling tired, days we snapped at each other over nothing because fear doesn't always wear a dramatic face. Sometimes it just makes you irritable. But something fundamental had changed. She wasn't hiding anymore. Neither was I. The investigation into her ex continued quietly. Charges followed, consequences arrived. Not loudly, not satisfyingly, but enough. Enough to close that chapter without letting it define the rest of the book. We didn't celebrate. We breathed. 6 months later, Evelyn walked out of the hospital for the last time. No wheelchair, no escort, just her hand in mine, sunlight hitting her face like it was seeing her for the first time. We didn't rush the wedding either. That surprised people too. They expected urgency, drama, a countdown. But after everything, we wanted something radical. Time. We got married 8 months after the day I walked into the wrong hospital room. A small ceremony, fewer than 20 people, no dramatic vows, just promises that felt survivable. "I promise not to save you," I said. "I promise to stand beside you." She cried then. "I promise not to disappear," she said, "even when it's easier." People clapped, took photos, moved on. But the real moment happened later. That night, after everyone left, after the noise died down, after the world stopped watching, we sat on the floor of our apartment, still dressed up, eating leftover cake with our hands. "Do you ever think about that room?" she asked. "All the time," I admitted. "If you hadn't walked in—" "I know," I said. She shook her head. "No, not if you hadn't walked in, if you hadn't stayed. That's the difference no one talks about. Walking in is chance. Staying is choice." I think about Mark sometimes, about the lie that sent me down that hallway, about how easily things could have gone differently. I don't hate him anymore, because if I've learned anything, it's this. People don't just betray you by doing something bad. They betray you by underestimating what their actions set in motion. Evelyn is still sick. That part doesn't disappear just because love showed up. There are appointments, medications, days when fear sneaks back in quietly. But there are also mornings with coffee and complaints about burnt toast. There are arguments about nothing. There is laughter that feels earned. There is a future, not guaranteed, not promised, but real. Sometimes, late at night, she asks me if I regret it. If I regret walking into the wrong room. If I regret choosing a life that didn't come with certainty. I always answer the same way. I regret the idea that I ever thought certainty was the goal. Because here's the truth I wish someone had told me earlier. Love isn't about saving someone. It's about refusing to disappear when things stop being simple. It's about choosing presence over potential escape, truth over comfort, staying over being admired for leaving. I visited the wrong hospital room. I met a dying woman with no visitors. And 8 months later, I married her. Not because fate demanded it, but because when the moment came to walk away, I finally understood that some mistakes are only mistakes if you don't stay long enough to see what they become.